Good morning, YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me for another entry in my video log of growing up as a Jehovah Witness and talking about some of the issues and concerns and subjects that I think will be beneficial for both Jehovah Witnesses, ex-Jehovah Witnesses, and ex-Jehovah Witnesses. Today's topic is another topic that hits very close to home for me. It was something that I have toiled with talking about because it's a bit controversial, but I decided to go ahead with it. I don't mind a little controversy. This one has to do with subjects that are not just controversial in the Jehovah Witness cult, but throughout different religions. So there are some things that I want to clarify before I even get into the subject. The first thing is that I'm not going to talk about whether or not homosexuality is acceptable from the Bible. What I am going to talk about is the reality that there are homosexuals in society. And then I'm going to talk about homosexuality that exists in the Jehovah Witness cult. The other part that I want to make sure that I'm clear on is that I am very clear that HIV/AIDS is not a homosexual disease. I'm actually going to try to make sure that I mention examples of people that I know that were not gay that had HIV and had AIDS in the Jehovah Witness cult. However, it would be contrary to my own understanding and my own experience to not say that there are quite a bit of homosexuals that do catch HIV and AIDS, and that in the example or my motivation for actually doing this video, I have to at least mention it. I'm dedicating this video to my cousin. My cousin actually passed away when he was, I want to say, about 26, and he was raised as a Jehovah Witness. He was also a third-generation Jehovah Witness, and my cousin died from full-blown AIDS. What really bothered me about his death was that because his entire family was Jehovah Witnesses, they refused to give him a funeral. So he died, they visited his body in the hospital, and then they buried him. So they decided that he didn't, they were just gonna bury him. They weren't gonna have any kind of funeral. And when I found out about that, I was furious. I mean, there's no amount of video that is going to cover how furious I was about the fact that they refused to give him any type of service for even his immediate family. My cousin is someone, probably the first person in my entire family that I have known and remember from the time they were born until their death. And it really breaks my heart because I remember when he was little, I remember when he was a baby, I remember so many things about him. When I left this cult when I was 17 years old, I only would hear about my family sporadically. And that was literally through word of mouth, if it was brought up when I came across my father or my aunt. And, for most of it, I didn't know a lot of things about what was going on with my cousins and things like that, especially on my father's side of the family. So I actually remember the last time I saw him alive, and it was at my stepmother's funeral. My stepmother's mother was not a witness, and my father, who had just been reinstated, they decided to have a repast at my father's house. And so there was a a group of people that were witnesses and people that were not Jehovah Witnesses. I actually hadn't, before that time, I really hadn't had any communication with my father for maybe 6 or 7 years. So we had just started at least communicating. And my stepmother, who I've already sort of talked about the situation between her and I and my brother, but I felt bad that her mother died, so I thought I would come to the funeral or go to the funeral, to the repast and the funeral. And I was surprised to see some of my cousins that I hadn't seen since they were young. And some of them, I was like, oh my goodness, now you're an adult, And he was there. And it was really like, it's overwhelming, for me, because every time I would go to one of these events where it was a mix of Jehovah Witnesses and non-Jehovah Witnesses, and some of my family would show up, there was always sort of almost like an overwhelming of people trying to sneak and talk to me, trying to tell me things, or just giving me a hug and walking away, which is normally what they would do, because they were going to shun me, but at the same time, it was someone they had known since, when I was, just a thought. So, but I still remember the last time that I saw him, and he kept trying to talk to me. I did talk to him for a little bit. I had no idea he was gay. I had no idea about anything really that was going on in his life. I just remembered him as, my little cousin that I had known since he was born. I mean, I was at his parents' wedding, which actually is one of my favorite weddings that I've ever attended in my life. It was so beautiful and quaint, and they're actually still married. But knowing that, I remember when she was pregnant with him. I remember when she had him. I remember him being a little baby, and then, and so now he's not here anymore. And that really made me start to think about the homosexuality that I know is in the Jehovah Witness religion, and that I have seen, that I've talked about in some of my other videos. In one of my videos where I kind of talk about my own personal ExJW story, I talk about some of the things that motivated me to know that this was not the right place for me, that I had a lot of problems with some of the doctrine in this cult. Some of the things were that it's a misogynistic religion, and I had a problem with the way that it viewed women. But I also had a big problem with the way that it viewed homosexuals. And I've seen, this is a very repressive, sexually repressive religion. So I grew up in this religion, and I, went through the whole reading of the different publications for kids. And I remember having to, young people ask and things like that they used to do. I have no idea what they do as of today. But when I was growing up, the things that I was taught is that masturbation led to homosexuality. There's nothing in here that talks about the reality of human behavior. Actually, I studied human sexuality in college, and it was something that was so freeing for me that I actually took a second class in it, because I needed to break free of all of the closed-minded information that I had received growing up in a sexually repressive cult. So masturbation does not cause homosexuality. You're homosexual or you're not. You don't have to do any of those things, and you can be gay. The point is that homosexuals have existed since the beginning of time, but you're not allowed to be a homosexual in this cult. But homosexuality is a dirty secret in the Jehovah Witness religion. I've known homosexuals that went to the Kingdom Hall. I remember listening to a very famous, I think even on YouTube and in the ExJW community. I just remember his first name. I believe it's Huey. He was a Bethelite that talked about being gay, and now he's out of the cult, out of Bethel, and married to his partner with children. But even before I heard about him, I actually had come across some people on another forum that I used to go to that were sort of informants for Bethel. And it was really revealing to me how much homosexuality is a dirty secret in Bethel. There's a lot of people in Bethel that are gay, and some of them are secretly gay, and some of them are repressing it. And repression doesn't work. It doesn't work. What happens is that, and that's, to me, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I think that's why there is so many issues of people that have uncontrolled or secret double lives, or are getting disfellowshipped repeatedly for sneaking out and doing these things, because you are repressing yourself to the point where I like to compare it to a spring. If you hold the spring too tightly, what happens is when it actually is released, it's just going to go all over the place. And that's how I see repression. And most psychologists and most people that have studied it would agree. So when you have people that realize that they're actually homosexual in the Jehovah Witness religion, they either repress it or they live a double life. But what they don't do and what they can't do is actually be something that they're not. I didn't know that my cousin was gay. I had absolutely no idea. I knew that his sister, and what's really funny is that his sister is gay. So I knew about that. And the way that my family talked about it was like this person had some kind of disease like malaria or leprosy, and that they were going to study with her, and that she was going to be, basically emotionally manipulated into staying in Jehovah's kingdom, and just detaching herself from her homosexuality. So what's a female homosexual? A lesbian. So when I heard my father saying this to me, I looked at him like he was absolutely insane. So, you're going to emotionally manipulate her, tell her that she's going to be destroyed in Armageddon, and hopefully that is enough for her to pretend not to be something that she is. And anyone that listens to any of my videos knows that the underlying philosophy of anything that I talk about is to live your truth. To be free to live your truth on your own terms, not to let any cult or anything in society make you feel like you need to be something that you're not. See, at my age and my experience, I've been around people from all walks of life. Like I said before, I've been able to travel all over the world and talk to all kinds of people. And I've seen a lot of people that are living lives for others, and I see the suffering, and I see the pain, and I see just what it does to them, and I'm like, okay, here's the path that you can walk. You can be free to live the life that belongs to you. And if you actually are attracted to someone of the same sex, then you need to live that, and you need to do so honorably. I'm not someone that believes in being promiscuous, but I believe that anyone that feels that they are something, they need to actually follow that out. If it's something that's illegal or dangerous, then you need to seek therapy. But I personally feel like no matter how you view it, it's going to be what it is. So my female cousin never stopped being a lesbian. She just decided that she was going to go along with them until she actually got a job that she could pay her own bills, and then she took care of herself and got a house. And my understanding is that her and her partner are together and living their life. And she goes and comes to the Kingdom Hall occasionally just to make her parents feel good. But she's not a witness, and she has no interest in being a witness. What happened with her brother, my cousin, is another story. Again, all of this happened at the same time. First of all, I didn't know he was gay. Secondly, I didn't know he had HIV. Third, I didn't realize that it had progressed into full-blown AIDS. So I'm going to do a little bit of an education for those of you that don't realize that HIV is a virus that causes AIDS. Someone can be HIV positive for years and can never have full-blown AIDS. You cannot get AIDS from spit and saliva. It's a virus. So you get it through blood. I was talking about this with my partner the other day. I told him about a subject that I wanted to touch on. So he was kind of asking me questions about, the Jehovah Witness cult and their view on homosexuality and their view on HIV/AIDS. So he helped provoke me to want to make sure I touched on a few things. So he asked me directly, what do Jehovah Witnesses think about homosexuality? And I said, well, Jehovah Witnesses think that homosexuality is wrong. But in my opinion, they know that there are people in their congregations that are gay. From things that I found out from, that my grandfather was a loose-lipped presiding overseer for a lot of reasons, that they will counsel you to, that you can be gay, but you're not supposed to act on it if you're gay. So that's one thing. Then he asked me, how did they feel about HIV and AIDS? So I've never, in my time, associated with the Jehovah Witness religion, the only thing that I've seen that had to do with HIV and AIDS is that it was their fault. That the reason why people got HIV and AIDS is because they had committed sins against God. So the things that I've heard about it is that, well, you got AIDS because you violated God's law. You're not supposed to be gay. You're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage. And then you're not supposed to get blood transfusions. So I told him there's no sympathy that I've ever seen in my whole entire time associated with the Jehovah Witnesses, and even after I left, because I had a little bit of a pulse check. There's no social service. There's no understanding. And that's really quite different from any other religion that I've ever studied and that I've ever been involved in. Catholic social services recognizes their HIV and AIDS members. They may not condone homosexuality, but I've actually worked in social services and seen that they have given social services for people that had HIV and AIDS because they were members of their flock. And I've seen that with quite a few different different religions. Some of them don't acknowledge it, think that it's wrong, but most have come around because they understand that not every single person that has gotten HIV or AIDS did it because they committed a sin. And I think that's the problem with the Jehovah Witness cult, is that they don't acknowledge that. I have never seen it. Right before I was leaving, my grandmother was studying with a woman that had HIV, and the way that my grandmother referenced her and how she was treated when she first started coming to the Kingdom Hall was terrible. And I saw it, and I was like, like my father had told me on the side, she's HIV positive. But this is an example of someone who did not do anything. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that you can get HIV from intravenous drug use. Well, this woman had caught HIV from her husband, who was a drug addict. He was a heroin drug addict. So why should she be subjected to mistreatment and discrimination in the Jehovah Witness religion? She didn't do anything wrong. She was married to her husband. Her husband fell on hard times. He got HIV, and then he actually got AIDS, and he had passed away. But she actually had given birth to a child that also had HIV. So these are examples of people who got HIV, who had AIDS, and it was not their fault. If you got a blood transfusion before you ever came into the Jehovah Witness religion, and then you started studying, why should you be treated any differently? You didn't, you know what I mean? Like, if Jesus can look on both of his sides of him when he's nailed at a stake, not that I believe this story, but just for the sake of this conversation, and he was able to forgive people who had committed the worst of sins, how are we as people that are supposedly evolved and supposed to have compassion and understanding, if they confess their errors, if they confess their sins, why are we not allowing understanding and compassion in the Jehovah Witness cult? So I just wanted to really touch base on what I've seen and the ignorance that I know goes on. So my cousin, he had it rough because he was totally abandoned by his parents. They kicked him out when they found out that he was gay. So he moved to New York, and he was very reckless. This happens a lot. It's not just about being gay. When your family realizes that you don't want to be in this cult, they many times will let you go, and you may not be financially able, or you just may get very depressed. I talked about my own experience, and I actually planned it, but I certainly went through a lot of things in myself because I didn't have the comforts of my family. So he moved to New York, and he started hanging out with the wrong crowds and being reckless, and caught HIV having unprotected sex with someone, and then he got HIV. One of my closest friends has HIV, and he's had HIV for over 25 years, and he takes his HIV medicine and his inhibitors, and he's not developed full-blown AIDS at all. So he was taking the medicine, my cousin was taking the medicine, but then he came back to the area that he grew up in, and he wanted to see his parents. He really missed them, and they completely shunned him. They basically, every time he would try to reach out to them, they would tell him he needs to come back to Jehovah. So out of depression, he stopped taking his medicine. And this is when I found out about it, because he had been rushed to the hospital. His grandparents, not my grandparents, but his one grandparent had went to visit him. They're all witnesses, but you know, some of the people have a kind heart. So they went to visit him and found him laying in a bed sick. And then they found out that he had been taking, he had not been taking his HIV and AIDS medicine. And what happened is he had developed full-blown AIDS. I got a call at work where they had told me that he didn't have long to live. And I was, you know, shocked. This is when I found out that, you know, he didn't have long to live. I didn't know that there was anything really wrong. That's when I found out he was gay. That's when I found out he had been living in New York. That's when I found out he had HIV. And, you know, someone who has not been a part of the cult, someone who has so many connections and people that are involved with AHAC, so many different associations and groups, I wanted to make a beeline down and get him help. Before I could even do that, he had died. I'm sorry, it just breaks my heart, you know. I don't want to get emotional in this video, but he died alone. He died without a funeral. I didn't know it was gonna upset me like this, but, and you know, I said I would pay for it. I would pay for the funeral for my cousin. You know, he's not a bad person because he was gay. He wasn't a bad person because he had HIV and AIDS. You know, they shunned him. They shunned him. And he died alone. He gave up. He gave up, and that wasn't fair. That wasn't right. Let me take a deep breath. Sorry, I didn't, you know, try to. Okay. Although people don't want to admit that there are Jehovah Witnesses that are gay, being homophobic and trying to push them into the shadows and not acknowledge what they need, or I don't think that the Jehovah Witnesses are never going to accept homosexuals. It's just not going to happen. I actually think that with even Catholicism or any places like that, but they should be a little bit more compassionate and learn from other religions that they may not agree with it, but they show compassion and don't mistreat their members in such a way. I wanted to kind of talk about why this hits so close to home for me and why I want to talk about it. Don't think that there are not any members in the Jehovah Witness community that you know, don't have HIV and don't have AIDS. That's actually not true. And what happens is that if they are mistreated or shunned or disfellowshipped when they need their family more than anything, they die alone. And I don't think that's right. So I wanted to share my story. Didn't know it was gonna make me so emotional, but I just want to talk about it. This is not a video where I'm actually telling people what to think. I just want to tell you that we need to do better as a people. And it doesn't, you know, like I said, you know, trying to pretend that people don't deal with certain things or are certain things doesn't change the fabric. It's like in society itself. Just because you don't agree with something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There are so many people, so many videos of people that admitted that they were gay and they were actually in the Jehovah Witness religion. I've just heard so many stories of people who, you know, I knew brother so-and-so was gay. I knew sister so-and-so was gay. They never got married. They always came to the religions alone, and then they died alone. They died feeling, you know, less than. And that's something that I don't agree with, how the Jehovah Witness cult deals with it. I'm not telling you have to accept this. I'm just sharing a story because nobody deserves to die alone. Nobody deserves to not have a funeral. No one deserves to be shunned. We're all sinners. There is no one out here that hasn't sinned. And this was a debate that I had had with my father, because one time he brought it up and I said, he should have at least had a funeral, even a small funeral. And he was like, well, he did things that, that's the cost of sin. And I looked at my father like, there's no sin that's bigger than another sin. I looked at my father like I didn't disrespect him by bringing up the fact that he was married to his mistress, that he had cheated on my mother with multiple women, he cheated on my stepmother with multiple women, that he beat my mother, he beat my stepmother, and so many other things that he had done. I just said, well, I don't think anyone in this room is any better than someone who happens to be gay. If you decide that that is a sin, then there's no distinction in the Bible about one sin or another. So I guess I'm waiting to see how, karma's going to repay you. So, again, we need to be careful about how we're judging people, lest we be judged. And I think, again, we can learn from the example of Christ on the cross. Have a little bit of compassion, have a little bit of understanding for people who are all in a struggle together. Um, Again, I just want to kind of talk about the dirty secret that goes on in the Kingdom Hall. I don't think it's right. And I just wanted to kind of share the story of my cousin that grew up in the Jehovah Witness religion, who was shunned, who died alone, who had HIV and AIDS. And I hope his spirit is resting in peace now. But I think it's something that we all can learn from. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you very soon.